appears that the new maritime assets that the Chinese are deploying in Bajo de Masinloc and in other parts of Calayan Island Group are pretty much using the cover of marine scientific research.
Papangga!
Imagine winning one of the most important international legal cases of the 21st century. A tribunal established under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea rules overwhelmingly in your favor. The world's highest maritime arbitration body declares that your opponent's claims have no legal basis. The decision is hailed as a historic victory for international law. And yet, 10 years later, foreign Coast Guard ships and warships are still operating inside the waters you legally won. That is the reality facing the Philippines today. As Manila marks the 10th anniversary of its landmark 2016 arbitral victory with a new annual observance called West Philippine Sea Victory Day, the armed forces of the Philippines have reported a sharp increase in Chinese military and Coast Guard activity in disputed waters.
Response ko dyan, nagsorry na ba ang China sa pag-violate ng ating karapatan sa West Philippine Sea, sa patuloy na pag-harass ng Filipino fishermen, sa pambubuli ng Philippine Coast Guard over the years?
In just 1 week, from June 23 to June 29, Philippine forces monitored 44 Chinese vessels operating across 4 key features in the West Philippine Sea, more than double the number recorded during the previous reporting period. The most striking numbers came from Scarborough Shoal. According to the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Chinese forces maintained a presence of 18 China Coast Guard vessels and 9 People's Liberation Army Navy warships around the shoal.
Ibig sabihin, there are instances na ang Chinese government are relying on dredgers or other China flag vessels to spoof their data, their AIS data, to carry a record of a China Coast Guard.
These are not occasional patrols. They are not temporary deployments. They represent something much more significant, a strategy of persistent presence. And this reveals a larger geopolitical question that extends far beyond the South China Sea. What happens when a country wins the legal battle, but the struggle over physical control continues indefinitely? Because the story unfolding in the West Philippine Sea is no longer simply about reefs, shoals, or maritime boundaries. It is about whether international law can survive when confronted by permanent presence.
The Philippines welcomes the issuance today, 12 July 2016, of the award by the Arbitral Tribunal constituted by the Permanent Court of Arbitration under Annex 7 of the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, or UNCLOS.
To understand why the Philippines continues to commemorate July 12 every year, we need to go back exactly 10 years. On July 12, 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague delivered what many legal scholars consider one of the most significant maritime rulings in modern history. After 3 years of proceedings, the tribunal ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines in its case against China. The ruling struck at the heart of Beijing's position in the South China Sea. The tribunal concluded that China's famous 9-dash line, which covers almost 90% of the South China Sea, had no legal basis under international law. It further found that China had violated Philippine sovereign rights within its exclusive economic zone, interfered with Filipino fishing activities at Scarborough Shoal, and constructed artificial islands in areas where it possessed no lawful maritime entitlement. Perhaps the most important sentence in the entire ruling was this:
The new government here in Manila is grappling with what might be called catastrophic success. What comes next is obviously going to be a delicate balancing act. It is a time for cool heads, and Manila is sensibly, I think, being careful not to flaunt its legal victory. It's very important at this stage not to do anything that could give China a pretext for escalation.
China's claims to historic rights within the Nine Dash Line are contrary to the convention and without lawful effect. This was an extraordinary moment. A middle power had used international law to challenge one of the world's largest and most powerful states, and won. But the ruling also exposed one of the oldest truths in international politics. Law can establish legitimacy. Law can shape international opinion. But law alone cannot remove ships from the sea. And that is the dilemma that continues to define the South China Sea today. If the 2016 arbitration ruling represented the triumph of international law, then the numbers coming out of the West Philippine Sea today tell a very different story. Because while the legal battle may have ended 10 years ago, the struggle for physical presence never did.
Ah! 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 Ah!
According to the Armed Forces of the Philippines, between June 23 and June 29, 2026, Philippine forces monitored 44 Chinese government vessels operating across 4 major features in the West Philippine Sea. Just 1 week earlier, that number was only 17. The largest concentration was at Scarborough Shoal. There, the Philippines recorded an astonishing 18 China Coast Guard vessels accompanied by 9 People's Liberation Army Navy warships. A total of 27 Chinese government ships operating around a single disputed feature.
East Philippine Coast Guard, BRP Teresa Magbanwa, FRRV 9701.
Elsewhere, Philippine forces observed 8 Chinese Coast Guard vessels and 1 PLA Navy ship at Ayungin Shoal, 2 Coast Guard ships and 2 naval vessels at Escoda Shoal, and another 4 Chinese vessels near Pagasa Island. These numbers matter because they reveal something fundamental about China's strategy. These are not occasional patrols. They are not symbolic visits. And they are certainly not accidents. They represent what military strategists increasingly describe as a strategy of persistent presence, maintaining enough ships, for long enough, in enough places, that physical presence itself begins to create political reality. Because in geopolitics, sovereignty is not only about who possesses the strongest legal argument. It is also about who remains there when everyone else leaves. When people think about territorial disputes, they often imagine invasions, naval battles, and military occupations. But China's strategy in the South China Sea rarely works that way. Instead of seizing territory through force, Beijing has perfected something far more subtle: the strategy of permanent presence. The logic is remarkably simple. Send Coast Guard ships. Send naval escorts. Send maritime militia vessels. Send research ships. Deploy floating platforms. And then keep returning. Again, and again, and again. Eventually, presence itself begins to look like ownership.
Either napilitan or mission accomplished, sabi ng Chinese embassy, that is not something that we really care about. No, what is important is they have already pulled out the floating platform.
We have already seen this strategy succeed before. At Scarborough Shoal, Chinese vessels have maintained a near-continuous presence since the 2012 standoff. In recent years, the same pattern has emerged at 2nd Thomas Shoal, Sabina Shoal, and Escoda Shoal, where repeated deployments have gradually transformed temporary confrontations into permanent strategic realities.
This is the photo of the movable floating platform that we are currently monitoring in Bajo de Masinloc. It has a deck area of approximately 30 square meters. Roughly, the dimensions are 5 meter to 6 to 7 meter in length.
The latest example may be the most revealing. In May 2026, Philippine authorities discovered a Chinese floating platform at the entrance to Scarborough Shoal. Beijing described it as part of a program of comprehensive research in the South China Sea. The platform was later removed, but the message remained unmistakable. China was demonstrating not merely that it could enter these waters, but that it could establish a physical presence whenever it chose. This is why the South China Sea dispute is so difficult to resolve, because the contest is no longer simply about legal ownership. It is about who can maintain the most persistent presence. And in international politics, persistent presence often creates a reality that legal documents alone cannot undo. At first glance, declaring a commemorative day may seem like a symbolic gesture. After all, a holiday cannot remove foreign ships from disputed waters. It cannot enforce maritime law. And it cannot alter the balance of military power. So why does it matter? Because in geopolitics, symbols are often instruments of strategy. In June 2026, the Cebu City Council unanimously declared July 12 as West Philippine Sea Victory Day, commemorating the 10th anniversary of the Philippines' landmark arbitral victory against China. The resolution was designed not simply to remember the past, but to shape the future. It seeks to strengthen national identity, preserve legal continuity, educate future generations, and reinforce a political consensus that the Philippines' maritime claims cannot simply be forgotten. Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. captured this idea perfectly when he described the 2016 arbitral ruling as a victory which our country should embrace and fight to enforce. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of the controversy was not the resolution itself, but China's response. The Chinese consulate in Cebu formally protested the measure, calling the arbitral ruling a political farce and reiterating that it considered the award null and void. That reaction demonstrates why memory matters. Because if physical presence is one way of asserting sovereignty, then collective memory is another. When enforcement remains difficult, remembrance itself becomes a form of resistance. And in the struggle over the West Philippine Sea, the Philippines is increasingly fighting not only for control of maritime space, but also for control of historical memory and national identity. At this point, we arrive at perhaps the most uncomfortable question in the entire South China Sea dispute. What matters more in international politics, legality, or presence? Because if we look at the Philippines' position on paper, it appears remarkably strong. The Philippines possesses a legally binding arbitral ruling. It enjoys broad international support for the 2016 decision. It has a mutual defense treaty with the United States. It has growing security partnerships with Japan, Australia, and other regional powers. And it holds one of the most significant legal victories ever achieved by a middle power against a major power. Yet when we look out at the waters of the West Philippine Sea, we see a very different reality. China possesses the ships. China possesses the numerical advantage. China possesses the Coast Guard fleets, the naval assets, and the capacity to maintain a continuous operational presence. And that creates a profound paradox at the heart of modern international politics. The 2016 arbitration ruling established legal legitimacy, but it did not establish physical control. As the tribunal itself made clear, it could determine maritime entitlements under international law, but it could not enforce its own judgment. China rejected the ruling, continued its operations, and maintained its presence across disputed waters. This does not mean international law is meaningless. Far from it. But it does reveal an uncomfortable truth. International law can determine who is right. It cannot always determine who remains present. And in the South China Sea today, the struggle between law and power remains unresolved. There is a larger lesson emerging from the South China Sea, and it extends far beyond the Philippines. For decades, we tended to think of sovereignty in simple terms. A country owns a territory, a flag is raised, a map is drawn, and sovereignty is established. But the South China Sea tells a very different story. In modern geopolitics, sovereignty is not only about ownership, it is also about visibility, it is about persistence, it is about enforcement, and above all, it is about endurance. Consider the contrast. The Philippines possesses legal recognition of many of its maritime rights under international law. China, meanwhile, possesses something different. Ships that return every day, Coast Guard patrols that never fully disappear, and a physical presence that constantly reinforces its claims. This is why the South China Sea has become one of the defining geopolitical laboratories of the 21st century. Because it demonstrates a difficult but important truth: a flag raised once may symbolize sovereignty. But a ship that remains present every day may ultimately shape how sovereignty is exercised in practice. And that is a lesson that every country in the Indo-Pacific is now being forced to confront. The Philippines' decision to commemorate its arbitral victory reveals an uncomfortable truth about modern geopolitics. Winning a legal case does not necessarily remove foreign ships, and symbolic victories alone cannot alter the balance of power. But symbols, laws, and collective memory serve another purpose. They preserve claims, they preserve legitimacy, and they preserve the possibility that one day legal victory and physical reality may finally become the same thing. This is ultimately the central question of the South China Sea. Can international law endure when confronted by permanent presence? If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussion.